Welcome everybody once again with a new mega episode this week, which is How to Mic Session 3. And today's session, as you can see on the screen, is going to be about how to mic guitar amps. Of course, this is one of the very hottest topics that a lot of the people go online and search about it, especially when it comes to metal. So the reason why it's kind of heavy on the metal side versus all the other genres is that it gets more complicated due to the overtones that happens there, and then the miking position gets even more critical, and treating the recorded signal as well gets even more critical because of the amount of overtones you get. So for those who are not into the genre, forgive me today while it's a bit heavier on the heavy side of music, which is metal music, because this is where it gets really critical and very controversial as well on what to use and how to use and what to do and methods of doing it, plus all the software versions that is also integrated with the same purpose in the end, is like to kind of cut corners in terms of what you need to use to get the same results. So today I have two of my favorite guests, Fali Dimania and Kuber Sharma. Both are renowned engineers in the industry, and they are also into a lot of that alley of engineering into recording guitars and amps and integrating that into the live audio scene as well. Today as well, I have a lot of microphone shootouts. So it's not going to be all talk, but there's a few things that I'm going to do on the slides today just to kind of give you an idea on how things work and why do we do it this way and what are the, let's say, the schematics behind it, or how do we connect things. And then we will go into the videos directly. So, of course, as you can see in the picture, it can get pretty much hazy. And it can be like pretty much a pasta kind of cables on the floor. I cannot show you the floor here, but yeah, I have at least 12 cables under my feet right now. So how and where to start? And this is where we need to kind of isolate what we need to think about first. A lot of people complicate things. They think about plenty of things in the same space. And I strongly recommend not to do that. Being a guitarist myself and a guitar tech, I face a lot of people who want to think about the strings, their pickups, the guitar type, and then, you know, the output of the guitar, what kind of pots and what capacitors in the guitar, and then what pedals and what amps and what cab, and then they mix all of that together, thinking that all of that is going to contribute in getting the tone. Of course, the tone is a big word in the guitar scene. Everybody wants to achieve their, their ultimate tone, but it's good to kind of go in steps about it. So first thing to start with is the guitar type and style. You need to know what style you're going to play, and then choose your guitar accordingly. You want to go heavy, then you need a guitar that can do heavy stuff. What tuning you want to go? For example, for today's shootout, I've picked up the 7 strings. Knowing that it's really hard to deal with 7 strings generally in terms of recording versus 6 strings, which is actually slightly more forgiving. But let's say if you want to go with a classic rock, or you want to go with a gypsy jazz, or you want to go with jazz, or you want to go with clean, you want to go with speed metal, you go to a thrash metal, all of that dictates what kind of guitar you want to pick up. There are crossovers. There are guitars can do multiple things, but you know, sticking to a guitar that can do the best, that is suiting the thing you're going to record, that is going to be giving you the best results. Now, step 2 from this is what amplifier style you're going to look into and brand. Of course, each amplifier has a character, has a tone. And we call them a signature tone because, you know, that is something that only these kind of amps kind of give you that tone. A simple example, we can start first with continents. You know, the American tone versus the British tone. British tone is more bold on the mids with average lows and highs. The American tone is more scooped on the mids, punchy on the lows with clear highs. This is how basic it can be. But between those, there are plenty of amplifiers that can do the British tone, and there's plenty of amplifiers that can do the American tone, and there are plenty of amplifiers that can do both. So it's good to start thinking which amp suits you best. And the easy way out from this is simply plug into the amp, dial in a few knobs, and find out if this is what you're looking for. This is what you're happy to gig with or to play with live. If you don't, then probably you either need to rent, borrow, these ways. Now, moving forward as well from that, just before I go about speaker cabinets, you need to also consider the amount of gain you're looking for. Heavy guitar tones require a lot of gain. More classical tones require less gain. You can go around this as well using effects, which is point number 4. So the most famous effect that can change the gain structure on the amp is the tube screamer. There are multiple manufacturers that do tube screamer. It's mostly famous by Ibanez, the TS-808 and the TS-9. And then there are lots of companies who made different versions of these with slightly different tones. But using this in front of the amp usually pushes a lot of the mids, which causes the amp to change the whole gain behavior. So in addition to the amp, you need to consider what amount of gain you want from the amp. Now, going to the speaker cabinet size, brand, and signature tones as well, here we go into another equation. Just like amps are not the same, speakers are not the same. Yes, they all look the same, 2x12, 1x12, 4x12, open back, close back. We're going to talk about this in a bit. But also what kind of speaker drivers, what kind of wood they use, the amount of depth of that speaker dictates the overall tone of the cabinet. And to give it a very brief idea here, the output of the amplifier, if you put it into a hi-fi speaker or if you plug in your headphones directly to it using an attenuator because you're going to damage your ears, the tone out of the amp directly is so harsh and it's not musical. So the amp itself is not going to solve the issue. The cab itself needs an amp to drive, so also plugging a pedal directly to the cabinet is not going to work. You need all of those together. But the whole combination, again, dictates what the overall tone is going to be. Effects if required, just mentioned it. Sometimes you need an effects in the front. Sometimes you need compressors in the front. Depends on what the overall tone you're looking for. You want your pick attack to be visible, to be audible. You want the sustain to be more or less. Then you start adding more effects in the front. If you want to use a wah to do a wah effect, like how I was saying wah, so that kind of effect on the guitar is called a wah effect. Then you need to put that in the front. Sometimes you need to put some effects in the effects loop, but that is a different story. We can talk about this in a dedicated webinar, which is talking about the effects. Now, the microphone selection, again, dictates the tone based on the type of microphone and the brand. Now, why today we are talking about all of that? Because what I selected today is one of the least used microphones, plus few of the used microphones in the industry, just to give an idea of what are the possibilities. Also, can we mix and match microphones? Absolutely. Does it change the tone? Absolutely. But why do we need to do that? This is where it is important. Before I talk about the speaker, the reason why we'd like to get the tone directly from the amp, that it saves you a massive, if not days, of tweaking your tone and EQing your tone and losing phase. I've been through this for a very long time, using all kinds of softwares, all kinds of simulations, all kinds of, ways to do it. But in the past week, using the old-fashioned way of miking a guitar amp, I was really surprised on how much time you can cut on this. Yes, it's not cheap, but to be honest, it cuts a lot of work. You mic your amp, you just fiddle 3 minutes with your amp for the dialing in, done. You're pretty much on what you want, and we will demo that. Now, we need to understand also speaker drivers and what guitar speaker drivers are specified or having this, niche functionality with. What are they different from normal speakers? So we see many manufacturers from Celestion to Warehouse to Legend, Peavey, Electro Voice, you name it. There are many manufacturers out there, and everybody says that they got, this kind of tonality or this kind of impulse response. Today, people speak about impulse response, which means that is the speaker linear or non-linear? Obviously, it's non-linear. It doesn't have a shape, or it doesn't have like a uniform shape, to be more precise. It has a kind of a random shape, but why is that? There are many aspects to why the speakers are like this. So right down here, I have a speaker, and I'm just gonna stop the screen sharing for a second, kind of demo a very quick thing here. So here I have a Celestion speaker. This is a G12 Vintage 30. A lot of people know that speaker. Now, close to the mic, if I tap the speaker, it has kind of a resonance on a low frequency, but if I try to move the cone, it feels quite stiff. If I get it close to the camera, you can barely see it moving. I mean, if I use the same movement on a full range speaker, you can see it moving up and down at least 8 millimeters to 1.5 centimeters, if not, about that range. But guitar speakers are made specifically to have low excursion. That means the coil, the voice coil, is focused always in the maximum magnetic field of the speaker. So that means when people go on a low notes and then the high notes or play both together in a chord, nothing is going to overlap on the other. Theoretically, to a certain extent. Do you break the speaker a bit? Yes, sometimes the speaker might go a little bit, but they call it a speaker break, which is kind of musical, which feels like, you're putting a lot of power into the speaker. But the most important part about guitar speakers is that it limits the cone movement. The other part that is known about guitar speakers is that it's made of cardboard or paper. So it's paper-based. So that means the amount of sound traveling through the paper is not similar. It's not the same. Closer to the cone, you get a different sound versus away from the cone. On axis is different than off axis. And we're going to talk about this in the next slide. Some of the modern speakers right now, they have neodymium magnets. So if you're used to some pictures with massive magnets at the back, and now suddenly you see a small magnet, don't be disappointed. Actually, you should be happy because shipping fees on those are less. Neodymium magnets are way stronger at a lower mass. So they can produce way more magnetic flux versus the ceramic magnets. So the magnet technology has evolved drastically beyond even my imagination. I was surprised in the past 5 years on how the magnets became today. Some of the magnets, by the way, they use them in their hard drives, the mechanical hard drives. They're neodymiums. They're really tiny, but the amount of power on those is massive. You literally cannot take apart 2 magnets made of neodymium without excessive force. It can actually hurt you if it clips on your skin, by the way. So the next slide here, we're going to talk about the characteristics of the speaker cone. So we have different positions. These are the most known positions. Are there different ones? All the way. There's one position which is not mentioned here, which is going behind the speaker, which is miking the backside of the speaker, which I did as well. So there are no rules, by the way. And eventually, I'm going to talk about a very interesting hardware that can actually help you pick up what you want. So generally, the cap, which is that dome in the middle, usually it's called a dust cap in some cases. It eliminates the dust from going to the voice coil, which causes a lot of scratchy sound, if not there. So over the cap, you have a signature tone, let's say, or a known sound. And when you go on the cap edge, you start getting a bit more brighter. And then middle side, when you go on the cone, you start getting darker. So the cap edge is where the brightest sound is usually, because that's where the voice coil is mounted. So this is where you get the sharpest or brightest tone. So this is where you want to go with cleans. You want to get like nice chimey cleans. This is where you need to go. Now, half the way in the middle, where it's on the cone, which is part of the off-axis family, this is where you start getting darker tones, but you also play with the mids a bit. So the mids start to shape differently. And by the way, this is a speaker-to-speaker difference. Not all the speakers shape the sound the same way on that part here. So you need to go online and hear some auditions on those speakers before you decide that all the speakers do it this way. Might do, might not. Also with speaker age, that changes as well. Now, cone edge is known to have the darkest and more cutting through high mids to some extent, but also that varies from a speaker to another as well. So if the speaker overall is dark, you cannot expect to get that happening on the cone edge. Now, also you have the distance, which is how close are you to the speaker with on-axis or off-axis. That also changes. If you remember when we talked about the drums miking, I mean, generally when you go slightly away from the speaker, you start getting more of the overall tone of the speaker. And this is what a lot of the musicians get confused with. It's like, I want to be getting a very distinctive tone that matches an album on XYZ song or whatever it is. But when you get far from the speaker, it matches what you already hear in the room when you play the guitar. So kind of getting a balance between close and far is a good thing. And in a few shootouts today, I'm going to show you a good solution to this. Now, a very easy rule of thumb here is the closer to the cone, you get more overtones, brighter sound, less lows. And then the more you go to the edge, you get more mids, more muddier tone, and more lows. Now, maybe some people ask me, can I blend both? Absolutely. You can put both, but you need to be careful about phase. Now, these speakers, when they're put inside the cabinet, then we have also variations. I mean, the most famous ones that people use in big stages are the 4x12, which means 4 12-inch drivers, just like the driver I had with me. Sorry, I think I skipped a few slides here. I'm sorry, I was not sharing my screen. So we'll go back to share my screen. Got carried away with my presentation. So this is the graph showing the positions on the cone, close and far. And then the next one is the rule of thumb, as in getting close to the cone versus far to the edge. And then the speaker cabinets as a whole, which is the open back versus closed back. So the most famous is a 4x12. That means 4 12-inch drivers. But you have 2x12, close and open. You have cabinets with half closed and half open. You have partially open, which is like the picture here. This is partially open. And if it's completely, you can see the speakers from the back completely. That means it's completely open. And then, of course, you have number of drivers, 1x12, 2x12. There are a very low number of 3x12, by the way. You have 4x10, 2x10, 1x10, which is inches, 10 inches, and so on and so forth. Now, in my shootout, I used something called reamping, and it's very similar to the schematic that I prepared earlier. So I was using my 7-string guitar. I think it's behind me, this one, which is the same one in the picture here. Active pickups. It was going into a DI box, which is a direct injection box, to isolate the ground and eliminate the noise from different groundings. From the link of that DI box, it goes straight into my interface, to my digital audio workstation interface, which is the DAW.io. Out of the DI box, that goes into the tube screamer, which is my kind of a boost effect in front of the amp. And then I was using the Bugera 6262, which is similar to the peavey 6505. I mean, that was what I had available here. And then directly into a Mesa Boogie cab inside the booth behind me here. Now, enabled to do the reamping, I need to use an auxiliary out of my DAW back into another DI box that I unplug from the Tube Screamer, and I plug the DI box instead into the Tube Screamer to do a reamping. That means whatever I record in the DAW, in that case, as you can see, is only the guitar as it is, as if I plugged my guitar directly into my interface without any amplifiers. Now, why is that useful? This is useful if you want to change your tone afterwards, if you want to change the microphones afterwards. The issue is that you cannot hear what is coming out of the amp separated from what the microphone is picking up, because the amplifiers are usually loud. So what you do is that you can actually put it inside the booth and lock on it. Still, with the amount of power the amps is putting into the speaker, you will even a booth like this is still going to leak, unless you have a concrete booth that is built outside of the room. Then you don't need to do probably a setup like this, and then you can take your sweet time to find the tone that you're happy with and then just record. But reamping gives you an ability to try different microphones and different positions sometimes and different setups. Now, the microphone is inside the booth, and then I can actually also move the microphones while I'm outside the booth using a very nice hardware that I got years ago, which is called the Dynamount. Let me show that to you. So this is a servo-based microphone holder that can be used for many things. You mount the microphone from the bottom here, the microphone stand, and then that servo moves in and out and sideways, in addition to the top rotating counter or clockwise. Now, this hardware is quite useful because what happens is, sorry, I got away from the mic. What happens is that you are able to change the microphone position and audition the sound while you are in your DAW or on your session. The biggest challenge that a lot of engineers face is that when I'm trying to change the microphone position between sessions, or stopping everything, walk away, go inside the booth, change the microphone position, go outside again, close the booth, hit record or try with my guitar, I might already forget how it sounded before, because it's like eating different meals. You start with the starters, then you go with you're with your soup, or then you go with your main meal. You already forgot what the soup tasted like. You already say it tasted good, but if they gave you another soup plate to compare, which is the same meal, by the way, let's say they gave you lentil soup. The first one was different than the other. You will not be able to distinguish both of them unless you have both of them in front of you, taking a sip from that and a sip from that at the same time. So having a servo-based microphone inside, or microphone stand inside, enables you to find exactly what is the sweet spot that you're looking for. You remember earlier I was talking that positioning the microphone on the cone gives you variations of tones. So picking up which one you want by walking in and out a few times, you're already going to be lost, and it's going to give you a hard time to decide which one is best for you. So that is a very useful tool, and I think the prices of these are getting really affordable nowadays, so it's a good choice to go for this. Now we get to the microphones. Now, the selection of microphones that I use today are these, and these are the microphones that I've wanted to pick up. The SM58 looks a bit different here because that's a 50th anniversary. So if you get your hands on those, you'll be very lucky because they're limited edition. But it's an SM58 anyway. The one I have is the UAE flagged one, so you're going to see that one in the picture or in the video. SM7B and the SM58, SM57, including the Beta 87, these are actually quite famous to be on drop-down menus in many of the guitar amp simulations that you find on softwares right now. But the selection in the middle, these are never there. you're not going to find the Beta 27. You're not going to find an SM27. You're never going to find a KSM 353 or a KSM 8. The KSM 8, in my opinion, is unbelievably versatile microphone. That's literally, for me as an engineer, if I walk out for a gig and they ask me to pick up one microphone that can do everything, I'll pick up a KSM 8. You'll hear why. These are pictures of the positions that I've chosen between different positions. So you can see the half open cab from a different company called Hyperion. A friend of mine actually owns these. And the Mesa Boogie cab, everybody knows that cabinet. So I've chosen between a 2x12 and a 4x12. You can see in the 2x12, I've chosen to blend two different microphones. So I've used the SM57 on the back and the Beta 27 on the front, and I switched the Beta 27 to the SM27 on the front to kind of see how they blend together. And it was sounding really good. So to move away from the presentation right now, right into the microphone shootouts. So I got about 13 videos today with different microphone shootouts, and I'd like to speak about them one by one so you not get confused because they might all look the same. So try to be careful here. And before I even start playing videos, please pick up the best headphones that you have next to you or earphones, plug it in your phone or your laptop, and be prepared, because using your laptop or your phone as it is not going to give you justice. Okay? So you have a minute to do that. Run, get your headphones or earphones, plug it in right now before I play the videos. Now, the first video I'm going to play is going to be the DI'd recording. So you remember when I told you that I recorded the guitar sound raw as it is, plugged in from the DI box directly to the digital audio workstation. This is going to play back how the guitar sounds in the mix, because I use drums and bass as well, just to kind of give it a bit of more fun. But try to pay attention to how the raw guitar sounds like when you need to do that in a reamping session. So be ready, and I'm going to play it back right now. Of course, I mean, that sounds very funny, right? But you know what? This was the basic ingredient that I required. That was the toughest part, to be honest, to get that right, like to kind of write something from my imagination that can suit this. And honestly, all the guitarists, if I have guitarists here, and I'm sure that I do, you know how tough it is to put two tracks together as much, to be matching as much as possible. And sometimes you forget what you did in the first one, you go in the second one, and you keep deleting until you are the mostly consistent in recording two identical tracks. Now, why do we need two tracks? Because in a normal situation, in most of the bands, you have two guitarists, two rhythm guitarists, or one rhythm and one lead, but in most of the time, they are playing the same thing. One guitarist on the right, one on the left. So to record that to be more realistic, you need to have two takes. You record the first take, you're done with it. You record the second take, you're done with it, and then you're happy to move forward. Now, why is it tough? Because you record the first take, you're happy, you go to the second take, it's better than the first take, you delete the first take, you do the first take, which is better than the second take that you did before, until you find the perfect match that you're happy with. So sometimes you feel there's a variation between the left and right, and that is normal, by the way. If any recording sounds like a fingerprint left to right, that is a trick that is done using delays. Now, some bands do it, some bands don't. I prefer doing a two takes because it gives you more realistic feel to the sound. Now, reamping is these two tracks that I played right now. will no longer play on the same output. They will change. I will change the output on Cubase, which I'm using here, obviously, into an auxiliary. And that auxiliary is going back into a DI box to the amp. Now, the first thing I did was using the SM57. And I used the SM57 on a interesting clip that I borrowed from my friend, which is this one here. So this clip can put two SM57s in a different angle. One is usually straight and the other one is angled. And if you remember in the previous slide, when I said off axis and on axis. So what happens here, I'm blending the two microphones together on a single track, or I can have two tracks, but you make sure that they are panned to the same position. So that means they are sitting on top of each other. So these, I've got like three clamps here. One is 45 degrees. The other one is 57.3. They call it the pi. And the third one, which I've used, was the 55 degrees. There are many companies that do different kind of clamps. Everybody calls them their clamp. So if Barry made a clamp, he's going to call it Barry's clamp. If Kuber did his clamp, he's going to call it Kuber's clamp. Honestly, all of them do the same thing. Do they sound the same? Not really, because you need to know what angle they are on. And that is the bottom line. So some people will tell you this is the holy grail clamp. This is only going to sound because it's the holy grail clamp. Just double check what angle it is at. That will be it. There is no rocket science in here. Now, a lot of the clamps are made for the 57 because this is the most famous microphone for guitar amps in the history of electric guitar amps. There is no picture on the internet that has how to mic guitar amps that doesn't have an SM57. So that's why I've chosen it today with this clamp to kind of demo it. Also, I have a nice surprise here today, which is I'm going to A/B that against a famous plugin that a lot of people might have used already, which is made by a company called Native Instruments. And they have the exact setup that I had today. So a Tube Screamer, 6505, and a Rectifier cab inside with an SM57. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to play first the VST because I'm going to talk about later about what VSTs are. So the next video is going to be a VST plugin on the same clean recording that I did with an SM57.
Barry, before you start, I had a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So when you're going out from your door, are you going to the amplifier? Are you using a reamp box? Are you using a DI? Are you using something in particular?
I'm using a DI, and
Okay.
I've leveled the signal out of the DI from the auxiliary send. So I've attenuated my auxiliary send by -10, which was pretty adequate.
Which is probably what the amp is going to want to see in any case, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've kind of used my ears quickly to check between my guitar and what the reamping sounds like, because I've recorded through it, so I'll have a reference right away.
Okay. Gotcha.
Nice. So now I'm gonna play the video with guitar rig. You're gonna see in the video you have two guitar rigs, one on the left, one on the right. That means each one of them is only working on one of the tracks that I just played a few minutes ago. So be ready with that. Let's just load that file. Okay. Headphones are ready, and go. So obviously you can see now that the amplifier does two things. It adds saturation. So when you heard the clean recording, it sounds so faint, you barely hear it. So that when you add a lot of gain to it, it added saturation, and then it sounds more up in the face. But the amount of overtones, the amount of harmonics, when I say overtones, that means harmonics, added to the fundamental tone that is there is a lot. And this is where it gets critical. Now, this is how a VST would sound like, or how a virtual instrument would sound like, which a lot of people probably might have tried already. Now, I'm going to play the real deal, which is the same rig that you see in the picture here in a real deal, but with proper SM57s using the same clip that I've showed. I know a lot of people go like, I forgot how it sounded before. I understand. So don't worry. There will be a recording of this, and it's going to go on YouTube. And I'll make sure there will be timestamps where you can actually just skip between all these videos so you can audition them. But obviously, you can hear that it has a lot more clarity on the low end and the high end, or we call it definition. So the definition using the real deal is right there. Moreover, to me as a guitarist, I didn't feel like that I need to EQ a lot. I mean, it sounded already like what I really need. But before, when I used virtual instruments, because the harmonics that is generated is an algorithm and it's not very accurate, sometimes there are frequencies that are too sharp or too dull, and you start, going around, especially at the low end and the high end. And when you add more high end, it turns to be more noise than actually to be more musical. So that was like the first thing that I noticed right away. Now, to tell you how did I choose my sound, or how did I move things, I have a video here that shows how I picked up the sound using the dyno mount or the servo that I have. So it's a screen capture. Try to focus on the leftmost, or the last two leftmost, which is the controller interface, and how the microphone is moving and how the sound changes when you move the mic from the cabinet. But also pay attention to how you are able to right away isolate what sound you're looking for. Okay? So ready with your headphones again? That sounds like, or looks like black magic.
Crazy that you can hear those minor differences with the tilt and shift of that microphone. Yeah.
Exactly.
Something that I think we just take for granted. Like, put the mic there and forget about it. But when you actually hear it like that, it's crazy.
Going off axis completely changes the texture.
Exactly. Yeah. It actually gives you right away a feel of where you need to stop.
Yeah.
And that yellow square is where the cone is, like the center of the cone. So it's quite easy for you to see when I've tilted the mic back to the cone. You heard that it's getting brighter again. But you can see that the variation of tone already happens from just positioning the microphone before I even touch an EQ. By the way, all what you heard today, or about to hear as well, has 0 EQ. The only thing I EQ'd was the bass, because I didn't have a bass amplifier, by the way. And the bass amp was recorded with the same Mesa Boogie cab, by the way, which is funny. I should not expose that, but I used the Mesa Boogie cab in addition to the DI, and I matched those to record the bass. So I think Kuber and Fali can criticize my bass tone in the end.
Oh no, that's actually a great. I do that quite often. I use guitar cabs on distorted bass quite often, actually.
Nice. Good to know. So I'm not the only one then.
You're not alone.
Perfect.
The one thing I really noticed from the VST to the actual microphone was that the VST to an extent sounded a bit flat. as in there was just not enough life in it, as opposed to the 57 where suddenly for some reason that guitar just it jumps out at you a little more. And I think it's how it captures the top end and how it captures the low end of the amp versus the VST. But I think
Absolutely.
stuff like this you can only do if you do this kind of A/B exercise to decide for yourself what sounds best for whatever recording and whatever project you're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that is very correct. Actually, one of the biggest challenges using VSTs is that when you try to warm it up, what happens, you start getting the wrong overtones and it overlaps on your bass or on your kick. So you always get that confusion on that low end, and you decide in the end to kind of bypass it and work on the bass guitar more than the guitar. But when you use the microphone, it blends nicely without any overlaps. It comes naturally. Yeah, that is absolutely true.
Absolutely.
I've noticed that, and it's kind of. I mean, to be honest, I never spent enough time. I mean, probably now due to the thing that we're sitting at home, I never spent enough time miking guitar amps with microphones like I did in the past week. So it was even a learning curve for me. It's like I've came to a lot of realizations. It's like, what am I wasting my time with the VSTs? I mean, VSTs are cool, but it never gets you close to the real deal in the end.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you notice, by the way, the SM57 was in mono, and I intended to keep it in mono so it'll be like bald in the face and I can hear more of the changes.
The actual changes, yeah.
Yeah. Now I have another few mono clips here, which shows you the variations of microphones. So I'm going to play a few of them right now. So next I have the SM58 in mono. I know it is in a lot of the applications that like VST applications. There's an SM58 for some reason. I know a lot of people step away from it, but it actually got a very decent tone, especially when you get to the cone edge. Because of the grill, it's able to kind of filter the highs and keep the high mids though. So yeah, let's have a listen to it.
Yeah, it's a different sound, huh?
Yeah, it kind of tends to warm up nicely without cutting. Sorry, Kabir?
Less what? What was that?
Less spitty. The top end doesn't sound that spitty. Like if you would put an SM57 dead down on the dust cap, it gets extremely it feels like it's putting a lot of pressure. Harsh.
Yeah,
very harsh. That is very true.
A lot less.
I think also because of the SM58 grill, because there's a little distance between the capsule and the front, you take away a little bit of that proximity effect that the 57 gives you, which is, I mean, it's a good thing and not a good thing also. So you're getting a little more low end on the 57 because of proximity, but it flattens it out when you use the 58 because the 58 is actually pulled back a little bit just because of the design.
Well, that is the beauty, by the way, of using the angled clip. So using the angled clip actually tames a lot of these untamed highs on the 57 because of the way they phase out. So this is a good trick actually to warm up the 57 whenever you use it. But you mentioned the proximity effect, and I was very surprised on how proximity effects work with guitar cabs. I mean, we know the KSM8 is probably one of the only microphones in the market that actually has a very wide sweet spot, as in a proximity effect resilient, let's say. And I wanted to use it on guitar amps for the longest ever. And I was very surprised on how it goes about this. So next video is the KSM8. It is pretty much against all the rules.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there were like a lot more sweet spots with that.
Yeah.
Yes,
When you
that is
were
definitely.
many
And the other thing
positions.
that I noticed, the other thing that I noticed is when you go on the edge, you're not losing clarity and you're not losing punch, but you're just playing with the high mids contour. So a lot of the amps that has the contour knob on it where you can change the high mids response, this does it naturally without eliminating the highs. And the highs are still sweet. They're not piercing in. They're still tamed wherever you go. The next video is going to be actually this particular mic in stereo. So we kind of keep track here because I don't think there is any video or audio clip online anywhere on the internet with a KSM8 in action. So I think this is a good opportunity to have it there. So let's have a listen. Just a quick note here. The video here is for the previous one. So if you didn't hear changes, that is normal because that was when the microphone was static. So to avoid confusion. But knowing the KSM8 as a flat response microphone versus other flat response microphones that I tried, that was quite something for me. It didn't sound like a flat microphone when it came to the sound of the guitar. It suddenly started to have dynamics or a change in the coloration of the sound of the guitar, unlike a standard flat response microphone. So it was quite different. And personally, to me, if I want to record guitar, I will go right away into the KSM8. That will be my pickup microphone. To be honest, I had to choose between two microphones. It was the KSM8 versus the SM57 and the clip. These are my two favorite tones. But looking at the simplicity of the setup, like single microphone, I was not even picky about where to put the microphone. I just looked at the cone kind of on axis and I went with it. And right away, kind of, it felt really good.
Definitely very forgiving. Like you're not
exactly.
Very, very forgiving. I mean, you can literally put it anywhere in that vicinity, and the SM57 or probably any other mic, you'd have to take a little more care as to where you place the microphone. This one, the changes seemed very. There were changes, but they seemed very minimal as compared to what the 57 was doing. That's for sure.
A lot more usable. Like you could stick any of those positions contextually in a mix of instruments, and all those positions would work in their own way. Which is what just two options. Like even if you could take two KSM8s and put them on the same cab, you might get you don't even know how many options basically, because you can mic up several spots which would not sound that sweet with the other microphones.
That is very true, Kuber. One thing I noticed as well is, normally when we dial in the amp, we are very particular about the tone that happens from the speaker. But what if I want to drive the speaker and I want to push that mids on it? But, normally it gets honky and unwanted. Yeah. But what happens now, I can position the mic to get the maximum break of the speaker, but without that honkiness from the speaker. So this was one of the advantages I liked about the KSM8 in terms of how much it offers me versus the other microphones. Next mic I want to try here is the famous SM7B. I know it's a favorite mic for plenty of people, but you can see now how particular this mic is about positioning versus the KSM8. Of course, the SM7B is a flat response microphone as well. the SM7B. It's still amazing. I like it. It's more forgiving than the SM57. But you can see that once you step away from the cabinet, the amount of output you get from the mic dies really quick. So, and the off axis seems to be less pronounced than other microphones. Of course, that's due to the long bottle that it has. So already you're even if you are stuck to the speaker, you already have about 3 inches away from it. So on axis and off axis is gonna be a bit less pronounced. I think this covers a lot of the mono videos that I had, but I think now gets to the interesting part of using other microphones in a full stereo mix. So next in the list I have is the Beta 87. So let's have a listen to this.
Beta 87, yeah?
Yeah. I think this is one of the mics
assume that it would be. I think it would be. You'd assume that it would be very fizzy in the top end just because of the mic, but that was not at all actually. Yeah.
No, it's actually quite balanced.
Yeah.
For guitar.
I've actually never heard a Beta 87 on a cabinet. That's very interesting.
It was more scooped in the mid range,
Yeah.
right? And more bottom, a little bit more like, I mean, the tops are still quite like flat and clear, but like the mid range, just compared to the dynamic mics, sounded a lot more scooped out, which is a great compliment, right? If you were to use it with the 57 or something.
You can literally actually, you can complement the low mids, which the 57 might be weak on its own. If you use a single 57, you need another microphone that can complement the low mids. And balance it out. So using it with the 87 is a quite a good choice, probably. Yep. The next Beta microphone that I have is a Beta 27. So I was always interested to try this microphone on a guitar cab because I know it's a flat microphone. I wanted to know how this microphone responds into a cabinet. I was quite surprised because what you're about to hear right now might feel that you kind of added a parallel bypass to the cab. Quite funny. I mean, first I need to salute the mic on, like, when they said it's a flat response, they really mean it. Yeah, I mean, I could hear every single thing coming out of the cab, even the stuff that I don't want, but it blended well in the end.
Right. And I think everyone has to remember that this is all reamp. So it's not like you've played the same lick over and over again and recorded it. So it's all that clean guitar that you played right at the beginning, and it's just reamping it every time. So that's crazy.
Well, that was actually a good thing because it actually cut a lot of time for me, and all I need to do is go in and out of this booth, replace microphones.
Yeah, but it also makes the test very fair because you have the same signal going through the same amp, so that whole chain is the same. It's just the mic that's changing and the mic position that's changing. So it makes
Exactly.
the shootout very fair, basically.
Exactly.
Interesting.
You can't put
So,
anything down or like a different, the stake is different. You can't say that. It's like it's the exact same source for everybody.
It's a better take, basically. No. It's the same take, basically. Yeah.
You
yeah.
can't chalk it down to the take, or you can't chalk it down to the inconsistency, any kind of inconsistency in playing, because we're using a reamp. So it's the exact performance, same performance for everything.
Absolutely. And the favorite part here is that now you are able to focus on what exactly you want to pick up from all of that. So you forgot about the playing and now you just focus on the engineering part, which is quite easy. So the cousin of the 27 is the, Fali?
Sorry, good. There was a quick question that someone's posted on Facebook and wants to know basically how do you clear like phase problems when you have two guitar microphones?
I'd actually kept that as a question for later.
That is a very good question. And it wasn't easy, to be honest, because the phasing that happens with microphones is not like other kind of phases that we go on, because it's distorted. So it's not 100% match. So your ear need to be understanding what to expect. But the most that you need to look at is the low mids and the low registered, let's say. So you outphase one of them and you kind of move the microphones until you get the maximum cancellation in the low end or the maximum scooped sound. So sometimes even the low end doesn't match, but you get something that it sounds completely radical, like very, either very scooped or very thin. Then you are the closest possible. But honestly, using two microphones together, you're going to get a blend. And that was what I was about to play right now. So I blended the Beta 27 with the SM57 together on a 2x12. So as you saw in the picture, I had a 57 on the back, 27 on the front. And honestly, it wasn't easy for me to kind of find the spot where I need to put the 57 at the beginning. Because at the beginning, I put the 57 in the middle of the back side of the cab, and then I had to move it to be right behind the speaker to get a proper phasing between them. Otherwise, I was getting a completely two different sounds, which blending them together was not right at all. So let's play that and see how that sounds. So let's go to this file and so you can see that it sounds really dark. I think that tone suits really well some stuff like post-rock or ambiotic kind of sound where you don't want the guitar to be right in the face and you like it to be nice and mellow and warm. So I don't think it's a right solution for this genre that I'm playing right now. But, this opened another question in my head, which is, what if I use a brighter mic on the front? So knowing that the Beta 27 is flat response, I thought, let me use the SM27, which has a little bit of a boost on our presence, let's say, because it's a vocal mic. So I use the same thing on the SM27 with SM57, and you would feel that it actually is slightly brighter than the previous one, but it's a combination of two microphones as well. So that's why you see 4 tracks, 2 tracks per channel. obviously you can hear that this is actually brighter than the one before, just because of the little bit of presence on the SM27. And the advantage of using two microphones is that now you are able to capture a lot more dynamics out of the cabinet, a lot of that wood sound. So you feel that the whole dynamic range just suddenly becomes massive and big. But probably picking up the speaker as well is something that you need to be careful about. So I've chosen this speaker. It has creambacks. I never used creambacks before. Everybody used greenbacks and vintage 30s or the G12s or, you know, the Eminence. I never used the creambacks before, and I wanted to give them a try. And I kind of get the name creambacks. It has the sorry, the top sounds very smooth on it. It doesn't have that, you know, very
It doesn't
sharp
have the
top, I think.
vintage 30 edgy kind of thing that they do on the top end, right?
It's very creamy, very smooth.
Yeah, I actually quite like the creamback speaker a lot. I mean,
Well,
even
I
for
never
metal,
used them, to be honest. That was my first time using them. I was quite happy.
really quite good.
Yep. So next in the list, we have the, let me remember, we have the ribbon mic, the 353. I was about to use the 313 first, but I remembered that I had a short video about it on my Instagram, so I thought, let me try the 353. I think the microphone stand, because of the weight of the microphone, because it's not light, it's slightly dunked down to be half the way from the cone. So I realized that afterwards. So I think the sound of it was a bit dark, but not quite dark though. So let's hear it.
Interesting.
Lots more.
What I loved about the 353 is the sound of the wood is right in the face. I could feel the vibration of the cab, unlike any other microphone. Probably I'll blend that with a KSM8 on a far distance without a lot of phasing, just to kind of give a bit more brightness and attack. But then that would be like that will be the ultimate guitar tone if it's up to me. I mean, another side note here again is that all of these are flat, not even a high pass filter on them. Whatever the mic was getting out of the cab, it's coming in. Talking about my dials on my amp, looking at them again. So bass is on almost 3 o'clock. The mids was on 1 o'clock. Treble was about 2 o'clock. Gain is about 2 o'clock. And of course, the tube screamer was, the volume was almost 3/4 with minimum distortion. The tone was slightly open up because I know that my strings were not quite new. And that was all about. No compression, of course. Everything was through the signal chain. I know there are a lot of toys out there, as in reamping boxes and all of that. They have good transformers in terms of giving you the right ratio, but honestly, you can get away with using a passive DI boxes. I strongly recommend passive DI boxes because they're easy to use in and out. The most important thing is that the ground lift has to be off, I think, most of the time, because tube amps, they use a high voltage and they leak a lot of high voltage on the chassis, which definitely will hurt your preamp on the interface. So passive DI boxes seems to be the safest. There are plenty of DI boxes in the market that can work doing the same thing, and then you just kind of fiddle with the right tonality that you get. One thing I noticed as well is that a lot of the preamp outs would not give you the same bass response that you had on the guitar directly going in. So boosting the low end below 100 hertz just by 2 to 3 decibels on your aux out restores that back. So that kind of also answers the other part of the question, Kubir.
With the reamp box.
Come again?
Regarding the reamp box, you're saying, because it's the difference in impedance, right? Because the amp wants to see like basically an instrument signal, and if you're sending it line, you're going to have to bring that down either by. But if you can't just bring it down, it's like the circuitry kind of has to change in order for the amp to, which is what reamp boxes basically claim to do, right? They say that they are changing the signal to what the amp necessarily wants to see in order to load the dynamics properly, right?
Well, that is a very, very good point here. Understanding impedance differences. I mean, usually all amplifiers have a 1 mega ohm input impedance, which is extremely high, while the DI box is in about maximum 22 to 25 kilo ohms. So if your amp has a low impedance input, I know that peaveys do have that, and some of the Fenders. So if you have a low impedance input, you can use that, and you should be good to go with this. But if not, then you need to understand what happens when you go from a low impedance into a high impedance. So that means you need to make up the lost frequencies, which is usually in the bass register.
Yeah.
So you need to make up that a little bit in which to match what's happening. But the point that I hate to always emphasize on what device you need in a name than the concept. The concept of reamping is using a clean recorded tone from your guitar raw with no effect back into the amp again from your DAW. And you need to know how your signal chain is and accommodate for the differences. If you hate that and you want to go for the highest credibility, then you can buy something that is dedicated to that, which is a reamp box. There are plenty of companies that does these and at various prices. The interesting part of today's webinar, aside from the nice shootout and the ability to hear everything in one session, is that we have two engineer gurus and guitar fanatics, and of course metalheads here, plus myself. So it will open a good discussion here to get to have a more contrast here. So first, I'd like to open the floor for Fali to have his comments and probably bring some of his experiences as well. And of course, Kubir is going to be the cherry on the top in the end. So Fali, you can get the broomstick right now.
Yeah, for sure. Firstly, guys, in case you guys have any questions, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A. The experience I always have when working with guitars is, the easier solution these days is to, get a piece of hardware, just plug straight into it, XLR outputs, and job done. But then to an extent, when you hear the differences, when you actually have a microphone and a real cabinet in front of it, you can actually hear those subtle differences, and those subtle differences, when you blow it up on a massive PA, do tend to translate. There's no question about that. So, maybe a little more, I think videos like this and sessions like this really give people a good insight as to, the various, otherwise you have no option. Either you own all the microphones and you own all the guitars and the cabinets and you just spend a month doing it. Or then Barry does the hard work for you and you just come here and check out what each of the mics do.
Also, Fali, to your point, in any case, if you want to make good tones on a modeler, if you want to be able to make any modeler sounds good, you have to first understand how a real world guitar, what the amp actually sounds like, what miking a speaker is like, so that you can, even within modelers or modeling engines, you're able to pick the right options, the appropriate options in order to be able to make something that works for you in a live scenario. So it's
exactly.
difficult to understand the basic rig first, the real world amp rig with pedals.
Yeah, because to an extent, we've worked with so many guys that have really kick-ass gear, and the sound that comes out from it is not necessarily great. Whereas you'll have guys which will have one amp and one guitar, and they'll plug in and they'll just sound, on any day of the week, they'll just sound great. So it's like, a little research even from everyone's side just to get the stuff sounding great on an amp first, put a mic in front of it, get that sounding great, and then translate that knowledge, I guess, to software and to whatnot. But yeah, great point, bringing that up. Something that we experience very often, in fact. I think the most for me is the difference between the VST and the mics is just there's a certain sonic character that comes through the mics, which didn't seem like it was coming through the VST stuff. And it's probably, if you only listen to the VST stuff, it'll sound great. But if you have to compare, now you can pick out the little, nuances and the little differences in each and every one of them. I think the most surprising for me was the Beta 87. I just did not expect it to sound that way. I was quite surprised by that one. So
I was quite
yeah,
pleasant.
I'm gonna
A definite
very pleasantly
option.
surprised by that one. Yeah, or like a 57 or like a KSM8 plus a Beta 87 might make for a very interesting sound.
Beefy.
Yeah, very cool.
I think really beefy. If you were to
Yeah,
combine those
get
two.
the KSM8 to add the beef without the mud, and get the Beta 87 to do everything else. I mean, to do that top end, it would be pretty interesting. Yeah.
Well, the funny part
The
is that
guitar
because I
player
have
we
all
work
the
with
tracks
quite
on my
regularly might not be too happy.
yeah. Well, since I had all the tracks on my timeline, I was actually interested in blending different microphones together, and they sit
Yeah,
really well,
yeah.
and you can hear how they complement each other. With I mean,
Right.
the best part is that you don't need to push the level of these channels anymore when you blend microphones, because each microphone is picking a certain spectrum, unlike the other one, and they either phase with each other in a bad way or they just sit together in a good way. There is nothing
Right,
in between,
right.
and that was
Right.
quite possible. I mean, I'll be quite happy to share with you the stems as well whenever you like, just to keep
Yeah,
a reference if you need that.
I have a question for both of you. One is, Barry, how are you doing your phase? How are you getting everything in phase in the studio? And versus some of those things can't be applied in the live scenario. So, Fali, how would we get two mics and phase to be proper? What are the live limitations? And what is Barry doing in the studio?
Yeah, I think that phase problem occurs if you're going to run those two mics in mono, which 90% if you're going to have two mics on a cab, you're never going to run it mono. So in the stereo field, that phase does not matter anymore. But it's when you actually, you'll have to probably put them in mono right at the beginning. And especially maybe when you're comparing with a KSM8, because you'll have to, there will be something there because of the two diaphragms. So possibly you'll have to, if you use like a 57 and a KSM8, you'll have to align them slightly. But I guess listen to them in mono and, the standard way, put them out of phase and then, dial in the delay until, the maximum low end kind of disappears, and then, flip the phase.
Yeah,
So
flip
I
it
guess
back.
that would be flip it back. That would be the regular way. But as long as we're working in the stereo field, I mean, that, 1 millisecond order of difference would not
It's
make a difference in
only going
stereo.
to
It'd make a,
We're going to make it wider.
a ginormous difference if you're in mono, but like not, you don't really need to worry about it if you're in stereo.
Well, that is very true. Usually, I think in live situations, you have two choices. You have a hands on stage with a talk back, and you ask them to move the mic. We go back again. The reason why I've showed the movement of the microphone is that this is the basics. You need to move the mic until you get your sweet spot. There is no calculation for this. To some extent, you can visually see something. So when I mic the 2x12, for example, so you can see that the front mic is actually hanging on the front. So it is the closest to the cab, to the driver, sorry. So I have the SM57 on the back, and it looked to me it's double the distance. So I didn't put it out of phase.
Okay.
And to kind of like, challenge myself, I literally put it out of phase, and I go like, no, out of phase actually sounds bad. It sounded more, let's say it had more baldy mids and less tops and lows. So it felt to me that it is actually already in the right position. So double the distance on the back versus the front looked to me that it's already in phase. I don't need to do a phase cancellation. So kind of going in basics like this on like mic distances versus then the mic movement. If you need to go on the side of the cone or on the center of the cone, then just moving the microphones when you have your mono out on your solo. So you solo the channel, mono it, and move the microphones until you get the optimal output.
And basically, it will never, two mics when you're using them in mono are never going to be completely in phase as far as distorted guitar sound is concerned in any case. So
Absolutely.
you'd rather work with the blend that you're getting and see where you find something that sounds sweet to your ears rather than try and get the perfect phase response, because that, even if theoretically you're there, may not sound anything like you want it to. So
well, but to actually comment on this, Kuber, is I would always go first on individual mics, hear them individually, and then blend them. If what I'm getting from the blend is actually more satisfying, then I'll stay with that. But sometimes using two microphones is actually an overkill in some situations. Where you need to actually, you know what, let me drop that mic, put that mic in that certain position, and I'm happy with it.
Where
So,
sound, using two might actually worsen the sound rather than just use one, because you might be getting just the right balance with one, right?
Yeah, sometimes less is more. So it in the live situation, I think that the biggest challenge is trying to get the best in the given time that you have. So probably for me right now, since I've tried it here in the studio, now I have an idea what to do if I need to do it on live situations. I know where to start, where positioning the mic, so I will not waste time with this. But I would not recommend trying things on stage when you didn't do it before. And I fell for this before. I've tried to use the Beta 57 with an SM57 as in to get a bigger stereo image. And honestly, I've failed, because what I didn't account for is that because one is a supercardioid, one is a cardioid, and there were two different positions on the speaker, it was more variations that I could handle. So I switched them off, and I stayed with the 57, the SM57s. Yep.
Cool, guys. So there's a question here, and I guess this question comes up quite often. So you have a guitar pedal and you have a stereo signal coming out from it, and how do you mic that amp to actually get that stereo sound from it? And there are a couple of ways that you can do it with one speaker, but at the end of the day, you still require two amplifiers because you have to have something for the left, something for the right. What are the ways that we do it in on any of our gigs here? Because there are times where I think that's compulsory thing is you have to have two amps, and then you can decide.
You can split a cab and run it in stereo if you like, but you'd still have to have like two amps. You'd have to have two heads, which would be able to, or like a stereo loop. But I don't know how that would work because it would still come down.
You mean this question actually? We will have three answers right now, and I can bet on this. So,
but I would say two amps and split a cab down, if a 412 down halfway, or you can do two amps and two cabs, but you're definitely going to need two amplifiers.
That is true. I mean, one of the easy ways out for this is a lot of the desks today, right now, the digital desks, they already have amp simulations on them and cab simulations. Or you can get one of those devices like, the Torpedo 2 Notes, or even like, cab simulation DI box. So the easiest way out, because sometimes getting two power amps will not work. Using the same cab to split into stereo, you're going to have overlaps on the low mids. So you're not going to have a very good stereo imaging. What I do usually, I run one of them on the cab, an amp, and the other one I run it on a DI with a cab simulation on my desk, and then I split in stereo. For the listener, it's very hard to tell the difference between dynamics because they're blending together. The mono field is still a combination of both on the low end. And I think this is the easiest way out. Now, if you have the options to go to cabs, to amps, amazing. One cab split into two. I would strongly recommend using the half open, half closed. I think some of the manufacturers do that. This would actually give you a better stereo width. That is how I would do it. But as I said from the beginning, Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
If we have 4 engineers here, you're gonna have 4 methods. Actually, you're gonna even have 8 methods. So, sky's the limit.
So yeah, I mean it's not ideal to use that one cabinet, but you know,
In a
if
pinch.
that stereo field, yeah, in a pinch, and if that stereo field is super important because you have a lot of stereo stuff happening, then you know you can go 2 Fender twins into one Marshall cab into one Mesa cab. Just remember to run it in stereo. So one
Yeah.
side of the cab is the left, and the other side of the cab is right.
So, and a tip of the hat to Mr. Warren Mendoza, where he does a bit more.
He's taught us most
Yeah,
of this shit. Like,
a lot of this is acquired knowledge from the OG Mr. Mendoza, where
uh,
he does a very interesting system where he runs one dry amp running down the center, and then he runs 2 wet amps on the left and right to get only the stereos, only the wet stuff on it. So it's like stereo wet and mono dry. And then you get like a stereo fader on your desk to mix the wet signals, and you get a mono fader to see for the dry sound. So, and sometimes we
yeah.
use 2 mics even on the dry cab, but that's still in mono.
Wow.
That's
So
the
Yeah,
that
way.
is pretty
he's
much
one
like an
guy where
insight.
you can really go to town with experimenting with stuff like this because he's always experimenting. So, you know, there are days where it'll be, and that's the thing, no matter how much he experiments, at the end of the day, it still sounds great. So I think as long as you can get to that place, so it's like there'll be a day where there'll be 2 twin 65s on a single Marshall cabinet. There may be one JCM 800 or 900 on a single Marshall. There might be 2 twins on 2 Marshalls. So it's like, but at the end of the day, once the mics are in front and we listen to it at the console, it kind of sounds almost the same as yesterday or the day before, if the setup was kind of different. So yeah, he's a
That is
good
true.
guy
That is true.
to experiment with a lot of this stuff. And I think you can't come to like one final setup, like, you know, this is the one setup I'm going to use for the rest of my life and nothing else, if you're not used to experimenting. Like you have to experiment with this stuff.
Yeah, it can't be a one and done, never ending. You're always
Probably
like
that's
going
why
for
I
the
have
next
these
best.
guitars behind me.
Yeah, exactly. You need them.
Yeah. Well, one interesting fact as well is that you see a lot of bands actually, especially when the bands have a one guitarist who's doing everything. You find them doing a lot of these combinations of doing multiple heads with multiple cabs, or two heads with 4 cabs, and trying to rebuild the stereo imaging using the randomness in the distortion. So that's something maybe I can comment about today, is that even if I use the same clean tone to reamp, if I reamp the same channel on the same mic in the same position twice, and I outphase them together, you still find leaks because the distortion is
Yeah.
random. And maybe that is one of the very important part about VSTs. VSTs does the distortion more, I
Exactly.
mean, it's still in a way more random than other softwares, but it's not as random as the tube amp is, because it's the possibilities are infinity here. And this is where it gets really interesting, is that I can play one guitar. I'm a single guitarist. I split my signal before, or let's say after, my tube screamer. Why split it into 2 heads, 2 cabs? And that already gives you a feel of a kind of a stereo imaging already, because of the randomness, because of the phasing between the 2 amps. The 2 amps, even if they are from the same manufacturer, they do not distort at the same time. They do not peak at the same time. So that already gives you a nice stereo image, and it's a good technique to play around with, rather than splitting the cabs, because when you split the cabs only with one head, you're getting the same distortion definitely, and just splitting the cabs. And the
Yeah.
only randomness is the speaker breaking, which is less random.
Yeah.
So
Although,
just a
so
side comment.
to the speaker, on a side note, to the speaker breaking, as you were saying, I have another question for you, Barry. What do you think, in your opinion, makes more of a difference, the head or the cab? If I was to use tonally, what affects what more, basically?
Wow, that is a challenging question. Both complement each other, to be honest. So earlier today, somebody asked me the same question, and the answer is if you get a good attenuator, and I emphasize on this, because never, ever, 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 ever plug in your headphones into the amp output. it's death to your ears directly. So if you get a proper attenuator and you plug in your headphones to the output of the amplifier, and you can hear all kinds of garbage you never heard in your life, and you're going to go like, what the hell is this amp? But then try to plug in your pedal directly to the speaker and there's zero sound. So the amp has two parts. You have the preamp part and you have the power amp part. The power amp part of the whole head is what drives the speaker. It has a bit of a tonality. It has a little bit of breaking, but not dominant. The dominant breaking part is the preamp, except for the Marshall, by the way. Now the speaker the speaker is actually working as a very dynamic filter. So it tames the lows and the highs. That makes it sweeter for the guitar tone. And then all of that garbage that you heard from the guitar amp through the headphones that you wanted to experiment with before,
completely gone.
Hence, you find a lot of these things called today IR response or impulse response, which replicates the equalization that the speaker does, which is the whole wood and speakers phasing with each other, generating that tone together. Now, an amp without a speaker is nothing. The speaker without an amp is nothing. They are interconnected. They complement each other. It's like running without sports shoes.
Okay, so like to modify my question slightly, what I meant to ask you was, suppose I was to take suppose I was to take the Mesa Boogie cabinet that you were using, and I was to put a 5150 or Bugetta like you're using through it, and then I would put another amplifier through it. Obviously, the character would change. However, would it be more than taking a 5150 and putting it through a Marshall cabinet, for example? Completely different sound, completely different kind of, construction. How much do you think, which tone would in that case be more different in your opinion?
Well, definitely changing the cab would change the tone massively. Yes.
Even I think so. I'd say that the cabinet sometimes has more of an effect on what is happening, how the amp is sounding than the amp itself. So a lot of people play an amplifier and it may be matched with the wrong kind of cabinet for it, and they're like, oh, I hate that amp. But like quite often it's not the amp that you hate, but it's actually the match between the amp and the cabinet that you're using. Like,
that is very true.
Basically what I wanted to get at. It's like quite often like amps get in my line, but it's like for example, in earlier when I was a little bit more of a teenager, much younger, we used to get 5150s, but we used to get 5150s with the original peavey cabinet, which had Sheffield 120 speakers in it, if I'm not mistaken. Sheffield something.
So,
yeah. And those speakers, strangely, the stock cabinet that came with the 5150 didn't sound anywhere as good as what it would sound like through, say, like a checkerback or like a oversized 412 Mesa Boogie, or something of that sort. So,
1960.
Yeah, for the longest time, yeah, exactly, 1960, exactly. For the longest time, the 5150, in my eyes, or a whole bunch of people that we would play, it was just maligned because we were like, oh, it's so harsh, it's so brash. It's anything but. It's just the match with the cabinet is what I meant to basically highlight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the variations in terms of what changes what is massive, by the way. I mean, the cabinet is an example. The amplifier is another example. The guitar, pickups, strings, even the way people play. I could identify people who play on Line 6 pedals just from the way they play. Yeah. And they were always asking me, like, how do you know I have a Line 6? It's like the way you pick. Because the way, if you're picking softly, because you already know that your signal chain has high gain, you slowly back up your pick and you start picking softer. But the moment you plug in a tube amp, you realize like, oh, why this amp is not responsive anymore. And you realize like,
sure.
Exactly, that's the thing. So there are little things that can actually make big differences, but the experience and knowing where things are going wrong is where you build up by having more rig. I mean, of course, not having as in buying, but I mean, go to music stores and experience them. Go online, hear different sounds. I totally agree that peaveys sound the best with Marshalls, probably the Mesa Boogie as well. Mm-hmm. But some amps sound better with different cabs. I mean, the Marshall through the orange, that's amazing. it's better than the Marshall with the Marshall.
Yeah.
Because the Marshall is too bright. When you put it in the orange darkens it a bit, and it sounds better. So usually you need to know exactly. You need to know what the cab is about to give you before you plug it in, and that kind of preference helps a lot in picking up which mic, which cab, which head, which guitar, and you're good to go. And then you fiddle around with the knobs.
IRs might be quite helpful in finding that out. I mean, basically just doing some kind of groundwork, because if someone has done basic SM57 captures of different kinds of cabinets, you can get a fair idea, even through IRs, as to what kind of flavor or cabinet imparts on an amplifier that you may have sitting at home. So like you may have one amp and one cab, but if you want to try maybe, before buying another cabinet, IRs are a pretty good way of exploring how you do that, right?
That is true. By the way, I mean, even blending speaker in the cabinets. So me being me, I have 2 cabinets inside with the blended drivers. So I have red coats with vintage 30s, and they complement each other nicely. So the red coats has that nice low-end punch and mellow mids. The vintage 30s have this aggressive mids and highs. When you blend them together, you get an amazing ring. But when you know what the drivers can do, and then you start to kind of think about what you can do together inside the same enclosure. But of course, then I cannot run it in stereo anymore.
Yeah. So what about multiple? What about, so would you mic the same in this instance? If you're using 2 speakers for a cabinet, would you mic? Obviously, in this case, you'd have to mic each speaker separately, right? But in other instances, when you're using, say, a straight monotone and you're trying to get a blend of 2 microphones, would you mic the same speaker, or would you go for a different speaker?
If I'm going mono, would I mic different speakers? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
This is for the benefit
only
of
do
everyone,
that. Yeah, I understand. Actually, it's a good question, and I have a question for you after that.
Sure.
Usually, I would only do that if what I'm trying to achieve from that single amp and single speaker is not working. But what I would do in that case, if I need to do another, let's say on a mono, another mic on top, I would think about a room mic rather than thinking about micing a cabinet. So, I mean, you heard in all of the recordings today that the guitar was pretty much in the face. It's a guitar amp right away. But if I need to produce a sound of a guitar, I would still add a kind of a room reverb or a room mic that gives you the ambient sound of the guitar cab in the room, which kind of sounds more realistic. But in a situation where I need to do mono miking and using 2 microphones, I would mostly step away from this unless what I'm getting already from a single microphone is not enough. So that's the same thing that I've talked about earlier when I used multiple microphones.
That you said earlier, okay.
But I had a question for you, knowing that the genre that you play, and I forgot the name of your band, so you can say that when you answer the question.
I played from Pangea from 2012 to 2016.
What is it called, sorry, again?
Pangea, Pangea. You can check it out on Bandcamp and stuff. I could probably
Pangea. Okay.
Pangea.
I've heard the recordings when Pali was in the monitoring summit, and I was pretty into the recordings. So knowing the kind of music you play, I think it's more djenty and kind of death metal djent kind of thing. Prog. Yeah, I think that is more accurate in that case.
Yeah.
A bigger umbrella.
Yeah.
What would be the situation with utilizing room microphones versus getting a more flat and dry signal for your guitars? What is your go-to?
What would I do if I was miking an amplifier to get? Okay, so I would do the one song that we did in Yashrad, which is the country's biggest studio in India. We did 3 microphones on the cabinet as dry just for the blend, and then we did 1 like kind of in the room large diaphragm condenser, which was kind of capturing the room tone, and then we kind of got like a blend of everything together and then we figure out whichever one worked best, basically. But normally, what I would do is end up using like some sort of room emulation later on. So I capture quite dry, like really quite dry, and if it's digital, then we do it through an XFX, or we do it through whatever. If you were doing an amplifier, even then I would just get the mic like really quite dry, really quite close to the cabinet, get all the proximity effect and everything as much as possible. I like that personally. And then I would maybe add like some sort of room emulation, like a room reverb, or maybe an IR of a room capture behind it, like.
And that would be a studio reverb kind of thing, right? Like a studio room reverb, a warm room reverb.
Yeah, warm room reverb. Yeah, and just to give it just some sense of space. But ideally, we're for the distorted rhythm guitars, we would go for quite a dry aesthetic on the guitars, because when you pan them out and all, they tend to sound wide in any case, right? And then for all of the wet stuff, like all of the lead parts and the textural stuff, we'd have like very heavy layering of effects, like a whole bunch of delays. So that would kind of make up for the lack of space in the dry. In order to create that contrast, we'd go like very dry, and with just a bit of room reverb to kind of give it some sort of, when it's playing by itself, it doesn't sound so too dry then, basically.
Nice. So I think we're kind of getting to the end of today's session. Vali, do you have any comments or any questions left in the pipeline?
Questions at the moment, and I think we blasted everyone with a lot of information here. But yeah, I hope that this information comes to everyone's use, the next time you guys are working on guitars. And actually, a lot of these things that we discussed today is you can apply these things to recording other instruments and stuff as well. It's just a lot of it has to do with experimenting and A/B-ing and things like that. But yeah, definitely an eye-opening session for me to actually hear these microphones that I've never tried before. I've never even assumed to try them before on a guitar cabinet. So that's, at least for me, something I'll be looking forward to the next time I'm on a live show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barry. That was very, very educational and eye-opening about moving it around and how off-axis, everything basically. It was really good.
Thanks, Kuber. I'd like to thank you both actually for being here as my guests. It's really nice to get different opinions, different experiences. A band member as well. I mean, I'm not a band member, so definitely I would not go that far. So we're getting the blend of all experiences here in one session. So that is very interesting. So thank you for being here today. Again, I'd like to close it today that the session is recorded. So they'll be recording on this on YouTube, on Shure MEA. So you can browse that on YouTube and you can find that in addition to all the previous recordings. We will always try to do a 1 mega session every month, which is how to mic. And we pick up something and we do the same blast off kind of what we did today, in which we hope we can cut all the chase and going online and A/B-ing things and wasting half of a day searching probably. So until the next webinar, you stay safe and healthy, and hope to see you soon, Kuber and Fali, in the next webinars as well.
For sure. So, have a good one, you guys.
Thank you very much.
See you guys. Thanks very much.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye for all.